Why do we send people to prison for being addicted to drugs? Our justice system is a punishment system, not a rehabilitation system. It's why people come out worse than before. A lot of ignorance in this comment section. We don't. We send them to prison for possession of significant quantities of illegal drugs, for selling illegal drugs, and for doing things like stealing to support their drug habit. But the actual act of being addicted to drugs is not illegal. The we means we Americans, right? Probably because it's never just being addicted to drugs. It's dealing drugs, driving intoxicated, stealing. No one is out there rounding up drug addicts and throwing them in prison. I see Reddit is also a place full of crime deniers. Because it's cheaper than helping them. Edit to politicians. If this wasn't somehow clear enough for you smooth brains in the comments. Because Reagan repealed the Mental Health Services Act in 1981. Simple as that. 'Cause some of them will do crazy shit while on drugs. We don't. We send them to prison for committing a crime. Being addicted is not a crime. Dealing with drugs, robbing other people so you can afford to buy drugs, these are crimes. And we send them to prison for these crimes so I don't become an innocent victim of your addiction. Because they tend to commit crimes to fuel their addiction. Because drug addicts typically commit crimes to support their drug habit. Because they steal and hurt people to get their drugs. Because when addicts can't get their drugs they become dangerous. The Racist Drug War. I strongly recommend reading The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. You could instead watch one of her TED Talks or other speeches and get the main talking points from the book. She breaks it down super clearly. I went in with a bachelor of marijuana, came out with a doctorate of cocaine. Exactly. How much did the war on drugs actually help? The prison system in the US is big business. It also sometimes prevents those incarcerated people from doing things like voting, and preventing them from owning weapons. Whispered they're trying to build a prison. I'm probably blatantly wrong, but I've always assumed it was a racket. Just like politicians got in with bootleggers during Prohibition. We don't send people to prison for being addicted to drugs. We send people to prison for committing crimes. Just because they are addicted to drugs while they commit crimes does not mean they are sent to prison for being addicted. Who is we? So many comments here are Americans struggling with understanding how shitty their country is. And simping for a broken criminal justice system. They've lived and had internet access their whole life. And yet this is the first time they are learning something negative. Amazing. Why? Because the prison system makes money off every additional body they have enslaved. For-profit prisons. Dollar 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 dollar. Money. Ignorance, arrogance, lack of adequate rehab facilities and like money. Same reason we used to send disabled people to asylums, it's easier than helping them. With the exception of possession charges. which should be decriminalized. It is usually the crimes they commit in order to obtain those drugs that gets them put in prison. I mean, the main reason Nixon started the war on drugs was as a way to be able to lock up black people, and the anti-war left without saying that's what he was doing. You can't criminalize being black or a hippie, but you can criminalize drugs. Also, given our justice system, it is much easier to convict someone for possession of drugs than for violent crimes or property damage. It is terrible that there are literally repeat violent offenders running around free while people are rotting in jail over doing drugs. Plus, they only retain enough of the evidence to convict someone. The rest has a tendency to grow legs. Because, in the US at least, we like pretending we're doing something when we're not. We also really like to pretend the one solution, punishment, is the solution to every problem. Thanks to leftover puritanical religious values, a lot of people see drug addiction as a moral failing instead of a health issue. We don't. You're working from a flawed premise. We in the US don't send people to prison for being addicted to drugs. People in the US who are in prison are there for being found guilty of a felony. Addiction is not a crime, let alone a felony. Because drug addicts not only cause harm to themselves, but they destroy families, their friends, and the rest of the communities that they live in. Addicts, as sick as they are given multiple opportunities to avoid incarceration, but they will fuck over everything they love for the next hit. Prison is a sentence of last resort, and by the time addicts get there, they deserve to be. I think we send people to prison for the dumb shit they do while being addicted to drugs. Prisons make money through forced labor. Because in a free country where we don't tread on me, the government gets to decide what we can and can't consume. Because the criminal justice system sucks. Mostly embarrassment for their existence. Out of sight, out of mind basically. Society hates the homeless, mentally ill, and drug addicts. In the entire history of the USA, you likely cannot point out one case of someone going to jail for being an addict. Possession, paraphernalia, intoxication. Yes. Because the state, local police and prison industrial complex need a larger budget allocation year after year. It's about money and jobs, not drugs. Because Christians don't have empathy and they make laws about it. It's the purchase and possession, not the addiction, that puts people in jail. Less drugs for them and more for me. There's a great book called The War on Drugs. I'll try and remember the author, and it talks how the British system used to be about rehabilitation and healthcare. But after the war on drugs started in the US, they were pressured to copy the American system. I'll try and find more info to post on here. It also shows how drugs and music county exist. Because for over a century in the US now, we've been propagandized into believing consciously or unconsciously that our addiction is a choice and a moral failing. That B, most addicts are black and or poor. That C, being black and or poor is inherently bad. That D, putting people in prison will in any way rehabilitate them, e.g. we call them correctional facilities for a reason. There are more reasons, like the legacy of slavery and colonialism, that I'm forgetting, but it's early yet. Over a century worths of propaganda. Because for-profit prisons need slaves to stay profitable. It's usually what they did to get the drugs that lands them in prison. Meth heads are typically theft. Heroin is usually sex work but also theft. B and E. Offensive littering. Camping on the street.